kuyamika Yehova Tukumudalila kutima vuta kwa wasoba Ebeneizu Nikutaliwa kujota Pakamwa bago matamandosa sosa Amakopa Oh no, I'm a Jesus man, oh no, my hope, oh no, I'm a Jesus man, I'm a dead, oh no, my puto panda guada, yeah, I wanna go there, I'm gonna kuti, kuchali chwalenga chimsi, maganizo sunga chimsi, maesera gada unji, ukakwada ndikumpempe, kumidimo matekeseka, ukamutiwa na malenga, ndizokuta kutekeseka, wotikona kumenya msigo, wanawina gaya, ukasia mweza msigo, kumaenda gaya, Amagoba, no, I'm a Jesus man, yeah. Oh no, Amagoba, oh no, I'm a Jesus man, Adanisa toba kufinga mikondo Mambu yoba ya suyolondo You already know Sikaputani magwala pama Uitani na mokara Chikururu simokara Alile chomulaka Zapeka dani ya kojuzi muoktobara You are royalty Vanity so teachable The rest is vanity Iwe isi sizako Ukasia kuyenda nitiko kumayenda nae Amagoba I'm a Jesus man, yeah. Oh no, Amagoba Oh no, I'm a Jesus man, yeah. Oh no, Cindy, what the Almighty has inside of you.
Come on.
Na pepe, oipayo machida manje, na pepe, oipayo makida manje, na pepe, oipayo makida manje. No, I'm a Jesus manje, yeah. Oh no, I'm a over. Oh no, I'm a Jesus manje, yeah.
Right, so I hope I'm live. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. It's Chance. I would like to welcome you to this special edition, God, Church and Politics. I'm excited, already excited. Every time I come live, I get excited. I am excited today because it's a special day. This is after 2 weeks ago, I hosted the chairperson of Malawi Congress Party in the diaspora, but also I also hosted the Bishop Shangza, who has the love for a party called Malawi United Transformation Movement. And we're talking about, so what? Who's fooling who? All right. Today we continue. 2 weeks on, I've got somebody completely different. And this is a man I have respect, who has got much experience, who has stood at the top level, has judged or passed judgment at the highest level. And we will be having a good time with Mr. Mwaungulu. But before I bring him on, for some reason, network is already playing up. Let me just welcome you guys, especially Christian Wedege. Welcome all the way. I think I know you now. By now, I should know where you're from. Sweden, right? Christian, welcome. Come on, shout out. Let me know if you are logged into my Facebook profile. If you're watching me from my profile page, let me know you are Let me get myself onto my Facebook page so I can shout out if you're joined in. Come on, let's share. Please share with somebody else. All right, talk to somebody else. Talking God, church, and politics. Meanwhile, whilst we make the big man come back on, let me leave you back with this song. I just love it. Kelvin sings. Amakuopa manje njamachitika. When you check your place as a Christian, the devil shakes. Here we go.
Mkumudalila kutima vuta kwa wasoba. Utaliwa kujota. Paka mwabago matamando sosa. Amakuopa. I'm a kid, I'm a yeah. Oh, no, my group, oh, no, I'm a kid, I'm a oh, my puto, panda, go up and Pereira. Get it, I don't want to tell it, I'm a segregata. I'm gonna continue. Kuchali chwalenga shutire maganizo sunga shutire maesera gada lunjire ukakwada ndikumpempera kumidimo matekeseka ukamutiwa na malenga ndizokuta kutekeseka kote kono kumenya basibo wanamina kaleya ukasiya kuyenda mitigo nkumaenda naye amakuba no, I'm a kid, I'm a yeah. Oh, no, I'm a kuba, oh, no, I'm a kid, I'm a yeah. I'm a Adani satoba kufinga mikondo Pambu yoba esu yolondo You already know Sikabutani magwada pama Kuitani na konkara Chikururu simokara Alibe chomulaka Zateka dani yako junsimu Oktobara You are royalty Balaji soti jako The rest is vanity Iwe easy season Otikona kumenya msibo Wanamina gale ya Ukasiya kuyenda mitigo Nkumaenda nae ya Amagupa No I'm a kid, I'm a yeah. Oh, no I'm a kuba, oh, no I'm a kid, I'm a yeah. I'm a oh, no Cindy, what the Almighty has inside of you. Na pe, oyipayo magira manje, na pe, oyipayo magira manje, na pe, oyipayo magira manje. No, I'm a kid, I'm a yeah. Oh, no, I'm a kuba, oh, no, I'm a kid, I'm a yeah. I'm a
Right, welcome back, and let's go. Let's stop sharing and let me bring the big man with me. There we go. Okay, I have Mr. Mwaungulu with me. Welcome. I normally say Dr. Dunstain, and he corrected me. I think it was a day before. Said I'm not doctor, but maybe I'm prophesying good things. Let me unmute you so you can speak. Good evening.
Good evening.
It's good to have you. You're loud and clear. I was getting worried when you popped out a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
But it's good to have you back. And what an awesome thing to have you on this show. Once again, I want to express my gratitude of having you, knowing you that you're from my village, or from my town, I should say, and a man who's operated at a very highest level with integrity, and here you are retired. But tell us a little bit about your tenure in office as one of the High Court judges in Malawi.
Yeah, okay. I actually ended up in the Supreme Court. I joined the High Court.
Right.
Yeah, I joined the High Court in 1994.
Right.
And then I had a small interposition when
Okay.
I went for my master's degree around 1999.
Right.
Came back in 2000. And then I was interrupted again because there were impeachment proceedings against me. I don't know whether, yeah, you remember that in 1991. So I didn't work from 2000 to about 2003.
Let's talk a little bit about the impeachment part. Why did they want to impeach you? What happened?
Well, basically, it was political.
Right.
Probably they were just a run of cases that they were uncomfortable with.
Okay.
But when I was here at University College London, I did a review of the election.
Okay.
So when I did that, I just published it on the internet, on one of the Nyasanets. So that seems to have upset the government because
something that was said sparked fire in the governmental circles.
Yes, yeah, not only in among politicians, but also within the commission itself, because I was trying to critique the methodology, which is usually what I do. I always critique methodology. But the president sort of moved away from that suggestion because Bakilo Muluzi then and he almost didn't want to proceed because he had actually promised that the decision to impeach could only be if it was unanimous. In other words, everybody agreed. So on that day, I was saved by 3 people who I shouldn't mention their names, who were opposed.
So the voting of whether to impeach you or not was secret, so that just these 3 friends happened to do their part secretly.
No, from what I understand, it was an open discussion. And so
surely you can mention them as a vote of thanks.
Really. I can mention Malewezi and the Aleke Banda, who thought that it was out of color to impeach a judge, and for the reasons that were given. The other one is alive. He's a good friend of mine, so I would only mention his name if he really allows me to do so.
Okay.
The problem might be that he probably doesn't know that I know that
that he voted for your.
He was one among those.
No impeachment.
Yeah. So when the impeachment went, it was really now the lower ranked files, the legislators who were bent to get me out. But something that is more interesting happened when the proceedings actually started. Because that is where now I saw the real problems, because while the president had just one issue, my fellow judges, very senior judges, also working in tandem with the Attorney General, started building in a lot of other cases. So although the politicians only put one matter for me, they increased the matters to about 26 or 25. And they did the same for my colleague Chimasula. Justice Chipeta had been removed by that time. So it's only me and Justice Chimasula really who...
that were removed?
No, we were not removed. What happened was that Parliament actually voted. They voted to remove us. But somehow they understood that the president must agree. I don't know how. Um, but what eventually happened was that when the president was asked to sign, he was under extreme legal and political pressure within and without.
Mm.
So eventually, um, he couldn't sign, and we were just told come back to work. There was nothing formal. So the next day we were just at work. But that was like 2 3 years later. Um,
Right. So,
and then
so, so to be honest, so what I want to really engage you in then from the word go is surely you must have touched certain buttons in terms of tell me what really got you into people or into the panel deciding whether to impeach you or not. What was said?
well, as I've said, since 1994, in fact, well before 1994, I was, in a sense, at the helm of the constitutional developments. Um, you might be pleased to know that, in fact, it was my advice to afford then that since the constitution banned one political party, I mean, I banned many political parties, they could actually come in as a pressure group, because a pressure group, by definition, does not want to see its power. It only is pressing an issue. So,
Right.
and I discussed with them like in the morning. I didn't realize that in the afternoon, all of them met and decided that they were going to form the pressure group. Um,
Mm.
and by the morning, there was a pressure group called Afford, and I'm sure that the legal and political fraternity were sort of surprised or shocked because they couldn't say it was a political party, so it wasn't banned actually. And
So wait a minute, wait a minute. So a Ford was formed at your advice.
well, Afford as an organization probably existed in some form, but
Right.
when Chiume came to me, he was actually saying that it is the end of the matter because Chihana has been arrested, and therefore, as it was expected, he would probably go through the traditional courts and then he would end up somewhere. So that was the end of the matter. And
Mm.
and so he opined to me that look, so that's the end of the road because they cannot form a political party because it's
Right.
banned under the constitution. So my
Mm.
advice then was, well, form a pressure group. So then they formed the pressure group called Afford. And subsequently, I think people like Fachi
Mm-hmm.
saw the point and they also decided to form a
The
pressure
pressure.
group, which became the United Democratic Front.
Right.
So through this kind of discussion, I was able to resolve an issue where the government was like caught in the act because they couldn't ban them because they were not political parties. And
Right.
then the argument was that it was just a pressure group.
And
Um,
this, I mean, I'm interested. It's as if we should leave all that I was about to ask you and should just talk about this. But you know what? Without wasting much time, I want you to I want to switch you a little bit because I feel that so the struggles you've had from the past already shows that somehow you've been at the center of what you would probably um, discard as not working in terms of our systems. Probably you've critiqued what you have seen to be something that's not really delivering or helping in favor of all Malawians. In this regard, I want to bring you to this issue of corruption, which is so rampant in our nation. Right now, we are at crossroads. We don't know whether SCB is sleeping well. We don't know whether she is actually working or she's been stopped. How can we? The first thing I would say is your overall take on the SCB's report and reactions, both from the media side and the people and the suspects themselves. In this way, in this case, I'm asking if you've come across the report that actually cited one of the top leaders in our nation, in Vice President Saulus Klaus Chilima, who was part of the team that was mentioned in the report, and many other people. Others have actually lost their job. The IG, the Inspector General of Police, lost his position, and some other people. What is your overall view in the report that came out about corruption in our nation?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to get to the specifics,
Yeah,
and I don't want to be understood as trying to, as it were, make an opinion about the individual cases and individual circumstances of people, because those matters are probably before the courts, and so my statements would probably be sub judice. So I prefer not to look at those specific events or specific people,
right.
but try now to look at the problem head on,
Mm,
and then from there begin to discuss with people um, what the situation is. I think that the best place to start is basically to say
mm-hmm,
that corruption does exist in
mm,
Malawi. Um, but we must always remember that corruption is just like any other crime. It is a crime.
okay.
So sometimes um, we tend to politicize the crime, and understandable, because basically the politicians are the ones who are involved.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that corruption is a crime. It's a
Mm,
crime like any other crime: murder, rape, theft, or other things.
mm,
For this raises the question in my mind that
right.
um, we have to fight crime.
Yeah.
Okay, but in this particular case, we also have to fight corruption. So the trajectory that projects corruption as the whole evil, or probably the only evil,
Mm,
might actually lead people to make decisions or promulgate laws or prosecute cases in a manner which can be very damaging, as it were, to the fight against this particular crime. Uh, um, and no doubt, it is a serious crime, and it is a very consequential crime.
mm,
So then you start from the broad question now:
mm.
uh, who should fight corruption?
That's a question. Definitely. Who should?
So you will notice that all the function of a constitution is to do two things. The first thing is to recognize and acknowledge the fundamental rights of our citizens. That is paramount, because without the people, there is no constitution. Um, the constitution is made by people,
Mm,
for their own good and their own welfare. And paramount in that constitution is that block of our human rights. Okay. The second bit of the constitution is now about the allocation of power. the allocation of actual power.
Mm.
So the powers have generally been described as being executive, legislative, and um, judicial.
Right.
Okay, so the constitution lays that paradigm. So you'll
Mm.
notice that in relation to to fighting corruption, the first question you ask yourself is, okay, what has the constitution said about the functions of the legislature?
Right.
So functions of the legislature are basically to make laws. So they make the laws. And in that regard, I think that the legislature should be commended
For making the
for
laws.
creating a whole regime
Mm.
of laws, um, which sometimes intersect, but with the primary aim of fighting the crime called corruption. So I think I don't have to give you a lot of information there. I think the legislature has gone quite its way
Mm.
to make sure that there's appropriate legislation. I want to move to the judiciary a bit so that I end up with the executive branch.
Right.
Now, the judiciary's function is very simple. It's to interpret those laws and enforce them. I will now use the word enforce a bit neutrally, to
Mm.
enforce. But basically, what the judges do is that when somebody comes, they will look at the law, they will look at the facts, and they will decide whether you have broken the law or not. That is the primary function of the judiciary: interpret and enforce. I don't like the suggestion that the judiciary should be seen as also fighting corruption, because that is not really the function of the judiciary. The function of the judiciary is to do justice. Okay, and to do justice, it just has to interpret and apply the laws to the facts. The question that arises is, how effectively have has the judiciary done this?
Mm.
I myself depart a bit from the trajectory which is coming, because a lot of people think that the judiciary is not doing much about corruption.
I
Um,
think that's Mr. Mwaungulu. I think that is the main cry in terms of,
yes, yeah,
um, in terms of, has the judiciary really been effective?
yes. And I myself would
Right.
vouchsafe that the judiciary has been very effective. I
Okay.
think that what most people don't do is to go and look at the data, which
Mm.
is the raw data on which you can make a statement about the judiciary.
Right.
Okay, I have at the back of my mind quite some inkling that our lower rank judicial officers probably would be corrupt. But even there, I'm putting it at around 20 to 30%. But I think what actually
When
happens
you
is that
say, Mr. Mongol, when you say the lower rank, who do you refer to?
I'm referring to our first grade magistrates
Right.
and
Okay.
the basically the and then lower rank professionals,
Okay.
magistrates as
But in
well.
your vouching, you are saying the top guys, they're
Yes.
clean.
Yeah. Now, and also let me move on because
Okay.
that's where I was starting from. I would say
Okay.
that
Okay.
um, there is quite some likelihood that
Okay.
at the lower level of the judiciary there could be corruption. But
Right.
again, there I'm saying it's around 10% to 20%. And I would argue from data that, in fact, much of the corruption which is being talked about in the judiciary has nothing to do with the actual judicial officers. It is
Right.
the rank and files. These are the people who meet the people, and once they have predicted something from the judge, they are likely to go to the person and say, "Well, look, I am the one who is going to do this for you, so you better do something, you'll be acquitted," or something like that. The chances are that the magistrate is not probably directly involved in that. And I remember myself from my own personal experience that the reason why I was protected from corruption was because my staff completely told anybody who was trying to get to me that this is not the guy who you are going to to corrupt. So either you pop out or just forget it. So I was protected that way because my junior staff knew what I stood for and were able to communicate it very, very clearly to those who were coming.
Mm.
And that was when I was lower rank. Among professional magistrates, I know that one of our magistrates was actually prosecuted. I think you remember that. I don't think he had risen to a point of charge, and he
Mm.
was a professional magistrate. He went and served his sentence, and that was clear that that was corruption within the judiciary. Beyond that, we haven't had any senior professional officers either uh, suspected or suggested to be corrupt. Uh,
Mm.
um, and I think credit should be given to the judiciary because we are the only ones
Mm.
who, when attempts have been made on us to be corrupt, we have refused and exposed it, and people have been prosecuted. I don't think other branches of government can say that. No, I know nobody, no minister, no legislator who has come up and said somebody tried to corrupt me, and I refused. So, police, can you act? That has
Probably the only people that came up and said we were tried to be bribed are the five, is it 5 or 7 judges that stood for the constitutional court? You remember that story that came out that they were
no.
doing?
That is just the latest. Um,
Okay,
um,
okay,
uh,
I know what. Okay,
you remember that there were two Asians who I tried myself as a judge, and they
right.
were trying to bribe Justice Mkandawire.
Okay,
Um, and I myself actually, uh, within 2 or 3 weeks, the case was over. The people were in prison.
right.
Um, but then on the execution side, the people started playing around at the back, trying maybe to say that the person is sick or something. So I don't
Mm.
know what happened, and that was done, and that was justice in Canterbury. Um, um,
Okay.
yes,
This
and
is this is in your tenure. This is in tenure of office when you
yes,
are one of those that are practicing. But
yes,
now, after that you come out, do you still think that it's been maintained? That kind of or that kind of a discipline that you say your your team had, is it still maintained? Have they lost it somehow? You
yeah.
think?
Again, I myself prefer to look at data rather than making very
Just here.
serious generalization. And I
Okay.
think the data suggests that maybe less than 2% or
Okay.
3% of people in the higher ranks would probably be corrupt. But I would vote safe that most of us who are senior judicial officers would not. And I think um, um, one of the reasons is basically that um, um, the executive and the legislative branch have
Mm.
made sure that we have correct remunerations and privileges.
That's that's
So
that's that's the part I wanted to ask. Would you say that the thing that actually has kept you secure from bribes and stuff is the fact that you guys were well paid?
yeah, I wouldn't say we were well paid. I would say that we were paid reasonably,
Reasonably,
uh,
right?
because I have discussed this for about 34 years, 30 years from 1994,
Mm.
when we started discussing and trying to convince the executive and the legislative branch that you see the remuneration of judges should not be interfered with. In fact, the Constitution says that um, the value of the judge's remuneration must be retained. Okay, so you must not, all the inflationary pressures must be taken into account so that the value of the judge's salary
Mm.
does not change.
Right.
Um, I think the most interesting thing that happened was probably during Bingu's time, and Bingu, unknown to many of us, and myself, I was not even in Malawi when Bingu was actually president. Um, Unknown to us, Bingu somehow came up and gave us a salary in Malawi kwacha, which because of the currency then, okay, um, the currency was slightly stronger, put us at around 4,000 to 5,000 US dollars per month for a judge. And that
Okay.
was one of the reasons why Malawi has been ranked very highly, because the
Mm,
our remuneration was only beaten by a few countries. I think it was Namibia, South Africa,
okay.
and somebody else. So comparatively, so it's gestures like that, which
Mm,
and there you have. I've got a car that gives me fuel. The last thing I would want to do is to lose that simply because somebody gives me a bribe.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so in a sense,
Okay.
that has that has helped. So
That can,
let me wind up that by saying that I've dealt with the legislature, and the legislature basically has done very very well. Um, 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 and the judiciary, to me, has done very well, because I am not convinced that all the cases that you hear about, whatever their numbers are, have actually arrived at the court. They have not. They are
mm,
still lying in the prosecution. They are not with the courts,
mm,
because all those cases which come to the courts, we are able to see they go very fast. Even for politicians, I remember there was a legislator in Muzimba. Within weeks, a magistrate put him into prison. That person is coming out. Um, 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 the other one, he was a very popular UDF minister. I've forgotten his name. He also was in. Um, and the courts generally work very fast. The judge's case, within less than a year, it was over. So cases that actually arrive in the courts are not delayed. And I would challenge you to look at the data, and you'll be able to see that, in fact, very few cases filter to the courts. Um, and of those few, I would say that there is 99% performance. Of course, that takes into account the fact that the Muluzi case has dragged for very long.
very long. And
Yes,
this is
but
my point. There's certain cases they drag for such a long time. You're saying that if these issues hit the courts, they
yeah,
quickly are dealt with. Why is it that
yeah,
some cases are still outside, in the constitution or whatever, as you're talking about, that when they hit if they hit your office, you'd surely deal with this. The likes
yeah,
of, okay, let's be honest. I mean, you remember Norman Chisale went into the
yeah,
courts,
yeah,
then went on bail. To this very day, we don't know what's going on.
yeah,
Can you can
yeah.
you can you shed some light on that? I mean, what
Yeah,
happens? That
I'll come to deal with that when I come about to talk about
okay,
the executive branch, and then I bring
right.
about the
Go
director
ahead.
of
It's all
public
yours. It's all
prosecution
yours. We want to learn because
something else.
Mr.
But
Mwaungulu.
for now, I just want to end up with the judiciary and
Okay,
vouchsafe that
perfect.
there might be some tinges of corruption there, but in
Mm,
a majority of cases, I would vouchsafe, and maybe people will think that I'm naive. Um, um, I would vouchsafe that probably 80% of our top judicial officers, even 90% of our judicial officers, probably are not corrupt in the sense that they receive bribes or things like that. And even in the most difficult cases where uh, you are able to see that the politics could weigh, the judges have come out very, very clean and objectively, and tried to resolve the issues to the best of their capacities. And the what we call the election case was one. The judges there just sat there and just looked at things. They made a few things that I personally was uncomfortable with, but the result was really a product of real independence and real exertion to try and make sure that there is a legal with outcome rather than a political outcome of the whole process. So it allows me to go to the executive branch of government. So remember that the function of the legislature is to make laws, and they have them in abundance. The judiciary interprets and enforces those laws, and up to now, as I've said, they have done very well. Now that moves us to the executive branch of government. So remember that the function of the constitution is to allocate executive power. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
If you take that, you are able to see that actual enforcement of the laws, okay, is a function of the executive branch of government. So
Right.
the constitution has come very clean that this function will be the function of the executive branch of government.
That enforces what? Say it again. The executive arm of the government enforces what?
Enforces the laws.
Right.
Yes.
So we're talking
So
about who is in
terms
that
of
category?
in
Who's
terms
in
of
that?
corruption, given that we have already said that the laws are good and the judiciary is available to interpret those laws, the function of the executive branch of government is to prosecute those people who commit crimes.
Right. So tell me, who's in that bracket?
Yeah,
Who's
so
in that?
I'm coming to that. So
Okay.
that executive branch is headed by the president.
Right.
Now, what the constitution now does is it looks at the extent of this executive power, because executive power is very pervasive. Okay, it's more pervasive than a decision of the court or even legislation. It is very pervasive. It can affect people's situations and lives forever.
Right.
And because of that, the scheme of our constitution has been to reduce the powers of the executive branch, or literally break them down, so that they are not really at the hub of the president. If you are following my reasoning there, you will notice that. So in relation to corruption, which is a crime, the constitution has still given the power to the executive branch of government
Right.
to prosecute crime.
Right.
But the constitution has said the president should not be involved. No minister should be involved. Instead, it should be the director of public prosecution.
DPP,
So,
Mr.
yes,
Kayuni.
yes. So what the constitution now has done is to say, if prosecution was left entirely in the hands of the president, it can be precarious and be disastrous.
Yeah.
Okay. Therefore, we are removing that power, or at least controlling that power, by creating a director of public prosecutions. Okay. So if you read the constitution, the sole authority under the constitution to prosecute crime is the director of public prosecution.
Okay.
That power has not been given to any other. It hasn't been given to the president. It hasn't been given to the judges. It hasn't been given to the legislature. It hasn't even been given to a minister. It has been given by the constitution direct to the director of public prosecutions.
Right.
So if you understand that the function of the constitution is to allocate power, what has happened here is that it has actually allocated power to the executive branch properly, but it has cut the power of the president by making sure
Right.
that prosecution is under a different authority created by the constitution, which is the director of public prosecutions. Now, this analysis is very important because I'm trying to make you understand that the prosecution power
Yeah.
has been given not by statute, by the constitution itself,
Right.
to the person of the director of public person. Director of Public Prosecution. The Director of Public Prosecution is the only person who the Constitution has entrusted the whole executive power to prosecute crimes. Okay. So you might have different personalities, you might have different political issues arising, but I think it is important to emphasize the centrality of the actual legal power, because the actual legal power has been given to the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Right.
And don't undermine that person either because of gender, like the former DPP, or youth because of the new Director of Public Prosecution, or things like that. The Constitution has entrusted them with that very important government power.
This is the guy who says, let's pin down the VP, take him in,
yes.
and it has to be enforced.
Yes. Okay. Nobody else.
Listen.
The president cannot take that person to prosecution. The judge cannot. Nobody can, except the Director of Public
DPP, Mr. Kayuni.
Yes. And based on that now, things follow. It means that the Director of Public Prosecution can delegate that power, or Parliament can delegate that power. But Parliament cannot delegate that power to the exclusion or to the undermining of the Director of Public Prosecution. It shouldn't be. Now, remember that even if you read the Constitution, the powers of the Director of Public Prosecution are not as open as I'm suggesting to you. They are restricted. And they are restricted precisely because they also don't want the Director of Public Prosecution to be an all-person decider on those on those issues. Okay? And normally the issues arise. Sometimes when I teach this topic to university students, I tell them that the decision to prosecute, whether you're going to prosecute somebody or not, is both political and legal. Okay? And I emphasize that it's both political and legal. I've just come across some literature now where I'm actually beginning to show that, in fact, the Director of Public Prosecution is not supposed to prosecute all cases. He is only supposed to prosecute where it is in the interests of justice. That is now the benchmark. So a crime could be committed. Okay, it could be committed. But the Director of Public Prosecution can just not wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to prosecute that case. There must be a public interest issue. Otherwise, he can prosecute everything from killing a mosquito to stealing a tambara. There would be no justice issue there involved. Okay, so today the Director of Public Prosecution, when making a decision to prosecute, is actually looking at the public interest and the justice of the case. Okay, so that it is no longer a political decision. By political decision, I don't mean that the president or the minister is involved. What I'm saying is that the director could actually be making a policy decision rather than a legal decision.
Right. Mr. Mwaungulu, before you continue, hold on. My people, listen to this. I'm being blessed here, and I hope you are also being blessed. One of the things I'm asking you to do is to call as many as you can, because I think the understanding of how the justice system works is going to help us, rather than us just having to moan about, oh, the SCB is not helping, or such and such is not helping. We're hearing here at the heart of these issues that the DPP has power. Okay, the man has not finished. I need you to do me a favor. Call your neighbors, your friends, your shemejis and all. Let them come on. Come on. All right, we'll be back in a second. This is Chance, your presenter for this God, Church, and Politics show that comes to you fortnightly. Let's put it that way, fortnightly. And I have, interestingly, one of the former judges in the history of our nation, Malawi, who's goodly retired, actually living abroad now, living in the United Kingdom. He's in the other side of London, of the UK. I'm on the other side of the UK. But we want to, we are getting as much school. I now feel like I'm a lawyer now after listening to Dunstain explain what it is because trust me, I was coming in to just want to cry foul to Dunstain. What's going on? Do we have wrong judges in place? And why is it that the cases don't seem to be going further? Now he has enlightened that. If you haven't caught up with this that I've just said, go back into the, replay this after this. But I want to bring him back. So invite as much. Let them come on. This is interesting. Because the next phase now, Mr. Mwaungulu, that I want to bring you in is, how does the SCB fit in? Okay. You've said that DPP, the Director of Prosecution, Public Prosecution, holds the key to prosecute all cases or suspects. Let's put it that way. How does the SCB come in? Because we seem to be having frustration with the SCB, most of the issues and the cases that are hanging over in Malawi. Everybody's like, SCB is not working. The office is useless. Martha is useless. How does SCB walks into the DPP, picture? Dunstain.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to come to there a bit okay. Later, because as I've said, I'm going in phases so that we don't lose the thread of the presentation. Where we stopped was I was trying to demonstrate that the absolute executive power has been given to the Director of Public Prosecutions by the Constitution, not by the legislature. It's not by statute. It's by the Constitution itself. And we must understand that the creation of the office of the Director of Public Prosecution was a way of controlling, sort of putting out of control the president from actually being involved in the prosecution of crimes. So the politicians are not supposed to be involved. It is solely the function of the Director of Public Prosecution to prosecute crime. I was also just winding up by saying that even that power is not as absolute as it appears, because the Director of Public Prosecution is bound by principle, and you only prosecute cases where there is an element of justice. It is not that you are going to prosecute all cases. That is actually virtually impossible. So the decision to prosecute can actually be reviewed by the court. So if, let's say, the Director of Public Prosecution decides that I'm going to prosecute this case, and then the grounds are flimsy, any citizen can go to the court and say, review that decision, because in that case, maybe there shouldn't have been a decision to prosecute. Or conversely, in that case, there should have been a decision to prosecute. So you're able to see that the legal arrangement here is really also to curtail the power of the Director of Public Prosecution, so that he doesn't think like he's an island, or that he's a superhero or Spider-Man or whatever. No, he is supposed to work within the context of the law. And citizens now must be aware that they can actually challenge the Director of Public Prosecution decision either to prosecute or not to prosecute, so that um, there is a bit of control. So you're able to see that the courts also can intervene in the powers of the director of public prosecution.
Mm.
So now we can move to delegation.
Right.
Delegation, okay? Because delegation, a lot of people don't understand. That is also a control mechanism, okay? Because if the director was doing everything, it wouldn't, he would be overwhelmed, or he would think that he's a superhero. And
Yeah.
so the law allows delegation of that prosecution power. And what it does is that it does it without undermining the constitutional and legal status of the director of public prosecutions. So remember that there is no way in which the legislature can pass a law that absolutely removes the constitutional functions of the director of public prosecution. And so probably this is the right point now to enter into the ACB.
Right.
Okay. Now, a lot of you think that um, the ACB is the only one who has been delegated the power to prosecute, which is not correct. What has actually happened is that if you read now the Criminal Procedure and Evidence Code, the Director of Public Prosecutions can appoint anybody to be a public prosecutor to prosecute either a specific case or forever. So that's why you have noticed some of the cases there have been prosecuted by lawyers. They were crimes, they were not prosecuted by the Director of Public Prosecution. They were prosecuted by independent lawyers who were working on behalf of the Director of Public Prosecution. But the
Right.
Director of Public Prosecution still retains the ultimate power. And I'll be talking about that ultimate power in a while.
Mm.
But, but let me add another way of controlling the Director of Public Prosecution,
Right.
which most citizens are not aware of. You see, under the Constitution and our legal arrangements now,
Yeah.
it is not the Director of Public Prosecution alone who can prosecute a crime. You can have a private prosecution. In other words, a citizen can come up and say, Dunstain Mwaungulu committed a crime and I'm going to take him to court myself. Not the Director of Public Prosecution, not the police, myself. I'm going to go. That
Okay.
is allowed under the law. So if citizens find that, the idea there is that if citizens find that um, the Director of Public Prosecution and um,
His
um,
team.
his team and all the people has delegated power to are floundering, a citizen
Mm.
must be able to walk out from Gilande or from Wenya or from Chingale and be able
Mm.
to say, I'm going to prosecute this crime.
Right.
You're able to see that even there, the power of the Director of Prosecution has been weighed down.
Mm.
Um, and while I'm at that, I want you to understand that the decision to prosecute is a very serious one. And because Malawi comes from the UK system, where because of the monarchy and things like that, power is centralized in one person.
Okay.
Okay, that's why we ourselves have a Director of Public Prosecution,
Right.
and he alone decides whether there is a case to answer and go for prosecution or whether to prosecute at all. Now,
Mm.
in other jurisdictions which are a little bit open, which I would think that would be the case in Malawi as well, um, if you go to the United system, the Director of Public Prosecution does not decide whether to prosecute the case or not.
Mm.
What he does is he gets those facts and gets it to a grand jury.
Right.
And the grand jury hears the evidence. And if it says, yes, Director of Public Prosecution, there is a case here, only then can the director of public prosecution actually prosecute the person, which means
Mm,
that if the grand jury refuses, there can be no prosecution. So you are able to see that this very vast legal power
mm,
is envied by most people. They don't like it. That's why they introduce the grand jury, so that the public is involved in deciding whether a particular crime should be prosecuted, and the director of public prosecution has to prove that to the jury. And if the jury is not satisfied, that person will never be prosecuted.
mm.
You are following there?
Very
So
much. Very much.
In Malawi, somehow we have a bit of that as well, particularly
Mm,
for cases that are prosecuted in the High Court, because there is a room for a preliminary inquiry. But even our preliminary inquiry is before a single person, the judge, while in other states, that decision is actually given to the to a grand jury. Now, this is very important because of what we are now trying to get into, that the constitution has actually, sorry, a legislation, not the constitution, legislation has delegated the power to prosecute corruption cases to the ACB. So the
Say,
first question that arises,
say that part again. How does the ACB come in? Say it again.
yes, the constitution has provided that the power to prosecute is centrally the decision
DPP.
of the director of public prosecution. But legislation has also said
Uh-huh.
that the director of public prosecution can delegate.
Right.
So you can delegate, like now he has delegated these powers to policemen and things like that. I
Mm,
myself am saying that practice should now be scrapped completely, because there was a time when you didn't have um, enough trained lawyers to prosecute these crimes. But now there are a lot of lawyers, and the state advocate chambers can actually have as many people to go and prosecute these crimes. Because some of the problems that we're having, the injustices that we're seeing, are simply because it's lay people trained for a couple of weeks who go and prosecute these crimes. Of course, even in the judiciary, we have lay people who also go through the same kind of training but are able to do justice. But in our case, there is always an appeal procedure and a review by the High Court, so that we can always check on some of these decisions. That kind of control does not exist in the police prosecution. So the legislature then has also now moved to say a specific crime. Mind you, that the police officers have been given power to prosecute any crime except where there is a death penalty or a life sentence. Okay, okay,
mm,
so they can try that. Um, and remember that even for them, well before the ACB came, if
mm,
they were going to try corruption cases, they needed the consent of the director of public prosecution. So the idea of the consent of the director of public prosecution has been there for 300 years or
okay.
400 years. Okay, because it is a way of trying to make sure that the constitutional institution does not lose grip
Right.
of of its power. So um, in relation to other people to who the power to delegate, the power to prosecute was delegated, um, there are also restrictions, and one of the restrictions is basically the consent one. Okay,
Mm,
because the director of public prosecution cannot lose control. Because if anything goes wrong, you're not going to blame the police officer. You're not
mm,
going to blame the ACD. You're going to blame the director of public prosecution, because prosecution is the director of public prosecution's constitutional responsibility. And that's
mm,
why you notice that um, in relation to other prosecutors, not only did they also require consent in corruption cases, they also needed the director's consent in, I think it's in libel, criminal libel. They also need the consent of the director of public prosecution in cases of incest. Um, so they still need the director of public prosecution consent. They cannot just go ahead and indict anybody for incest or for criminal libel. Why? If you look at criminal libel, the chances are that the cases are really doubtful. If you read the libel laws, the defenses are so open that libel is so difficult to prove or to establish. Okay. And so what the law is trying to say there is that no, then don't allow anybody to do that unless the director of public prosecution has had a real scrutiny of the evidence and is convinced that there is libel which should be prosecuted. In the same way, when you look at incest, because incest is a family matter, and people can hide matters, and it can ruin a family both ways. If it is known, if it's not known, it can ruin the child emotionally. If it is known, it's a public scandal that splits the family completely. So what the law is saying is that in those circumstances, you need the input, the insight, and the application of the director of public prosecution before you can actually decide to prosecute those cases.
Mr.
Okay.
Mwaungulu.
So based on that, if you follow that, let me move on. So based on that analysis, what the legislature has also done now is to create the Anti-Corruption Bureau.
Right.
Notice that the Anti-Corruption Bureau has been given two functions, and a lot of people miss this. Okay. They have been given power to investigate.
Right.
And the power to prosecute. Are you following me?
Very well. Very well.
And they also prosecute. Now,
Right.
if you look at it, if you look at my criticism about why the police prosecutors should not be involved, either police prosecutors are the police is the institution that investigates the crimes. And then if you tell that institution to go and prosecute the crimes, then they can doctor the evidence, they can do whatever they want. Okay. And therefore, to me, it's very uncomfortable that the power to prosecute should be in the police at all. Not now. There were reasons why we had it. But now you cannot give the power to investigate and the power to prosecute to one institution called the police.
Okay.
So that argument now comes in mutatis mutandis to the director of the director of ACB. He has been given power to investigate and has also been given power to prosecute. Now, if you look at it from just the power of investigation, that's a lot of work for the director. And given the intricacies of the cases, that is quite some function. And it is actually a key function of the director of ACB. But they have allowed the director of public prosecution to prosecute those crimes as well. So I myself, as a jurist and as a theorist, I can always see the problem there. Okay. That you can have a wicked investigation simply because the director of public prosecution is excited about prosecution. Okay. Or the reverse. Okay. There is a lot of evidence, but the director of public prosecution might not want to prosecute. Okay. Now, if people are comfortable with giving this kind of power to one person called the director of ACB, I have real conceptual issues with it in just at the beginning. And I think that is why we're having the problems that we're now having. Okay. Because now when you begin to see the skirmishes that are going on between the director of public prosecution and the ACB, they are in relation to the two powers that I've just mentioned. the power to investigate and the power to
prosecute.
What the legislature has done is basically to say that the powers which really are that of the director of the public prosecution under the constitution are given in full force to an institution which has been created by statute. There is a big issue there. And I think that scholars and policymakers must be able to investigate that, because that power has not even been given to the director of public prosecution. The director of public prosecution does not investigate crime.
No.
The police does. And the police have worked hard and convinced the director of public prosecution by bringing correct evidence from their investigation, so that the director of public prosecution can decide whether there was can make prosecute. So if you look at it, the dynamics here is that this ACB that you have created has got more powers than the director of
okay. But then at the same time, the DPP has power to stop the investigations. I mean,
exactly. I was coming to that when I was talking about the other checks. Okay, so you're able to see that we have already created a situation here.
The confusion here.
You see. So when you criticize the director of public ACB would say, well, wait a minute. But I don't have the consent. I don't have the power. Okay. When you go to the director of public prosecution, the director of public prosecution, he says, wait a minute.
I don't have the investigations.
That power is not yours. That power is mine. You can investigate, but the power to prosecute is mine. And the director of public prosecution has a point. And the legislature and the ACB has no point on that point, because the ACB is a creation of by statute. It is not mentioned in the constitution. Yes. And so from an analytical point of view, that is really where the legal drama now arises.
Okay.
Can we actually give another institution by statute to have more powers or equal powers to the director of public prosecution? You answer it for yourselves. But we are able to see that is exactly where the problem is. I think Parliament cannot begin to work in such a way that it undermines the power of the director of public prosecution.
Mr. Mwaungulu, listen, I need you back next week. Can you promise me you're going to come back?
No problem.
Please, because I know that you've just touched a little bit. You've touched the merging of the SCB or the creation of SCB under DPP, but I need you to take it further from there. And I know you've got a lot to say. There was something else you and me talked about in the solutions of how can we combat corruption. You've got something that you have to say. Not today, because of time. The reason I have to stop you here is because of time. Listen.
Yeah, excellent. No, I'm available next week.
Next time. Please. After your lecturing today, I feel I'm a law student right now. I'm being honest. I mean, thank you so much, because it clears us of us just pointing fingers rather than having the understanding which are brought in. This is so intelligently brought in for our education, if you like. Now I know it's not just down to the SCB, and then it's not even just down to the DPP. There's confusion right here. Anyway, you will start from here. Okay. You will start from here next week, but allow me to let you go. Thank you so much for accepting to come on this show. I really am proud of you once again. Thank you so much. God bless you, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you so much. God bless you too as well.
Thank you. Okay, that's how we ended, and that was Mr. Dunstain Mwaungulu. Listen, this man is loaded, all right? So we can learn so much. So we are cleared. So we are not just shouting, we're not barking as dogs that are barking without any aim at all. And that's the truth. The truth of the matter is most of us, including myself, have been angry with what's going on. Why is it that certain cases don't seem to be going further the distance? I mean, there are a lot of people probably, even on this stream right now, there are question marks still. I know you've got questions. Please pull up next week. And I'm hoping next week that Mr. Mwaungulu will be able to finish within time so we can give time to the question marks that you have. Okay? But for now, allow me to say thank you so much. Have a good night. I will see you next week, same time, 8 p.m. Next week, Monday, 8 p.m. with the man Dunstain Mwaungulu. Have a good night. Bye-bye.